Hello, welcome to my hotel room in Madison, Wisconsin. I am here, I got here in the middle of spring break to design a show, the lighting for a show called Elephant and Piggy. We are in a play for the Children's Theater of Madison, which is one of the major producing companies here in the city of Madison, Wisconsin. And so I am bringing you some digital content because I can't be physically with you in class. So I'm trying a new technology here. I've never used Zoom to make digital content, but we're going to see how it works. I'm hopeful that both the captioning and the screen share are going to be really helpful for you. So, acting. That's what we're talking about today. Um, let's dig in. I wanted to start by asking you to pause for a second and think about what you already know about acting, or maybe even to think about what like your preconceived notions about acting are. Um, because I think there's a lot to dig into here. We're only spending a day of class time, um, only a couple of activities around this. And this is just one of the many areas of theater that people spend their entire lives sort of learning more about and digging into. And so I think it's really useful for us whenever we're beginning to explore one of those things in depth, in the same way that we did when we were first reading a play. And I was like, you've read a play before, but maybe you've never read a play like this before. Thinking about all the details, really digging in that way. Maybe the way you've thought about acting is from a really surface level perspective. Maybe you think all actors are really famous. Maybe you think all actors are jerks. Maybe you think um all actors do is memorize lines and go do something that someone else tells them to all day. Trying to think of the negative stereotypes of actors, but maybe you have some positive stereotypes of actors, like all actors are really funny or acting comes easily to everyone who acts. Um, anyway, I just like think about that for a minute. Um, Maybe you're thinking about, I know, here's what I want you to know about what an actor does. Here's what an actor does. Here are the job description requirements, perhaps the beginning ones of an actor. So actors portray characters. I think this is really important, particularly in our contemporary media landscape. We have actors who play the same kinds of characters from one media franchise to another. And we lose this understanding of the actor is not the character. Um, Last year, the New York Times did this really beautiful article around flow that from the progressive commercials, um, and how, as an actor, landing that role was really great for her. See, and I can't even remember her name. I read this whole expose on her. Anyway, she, right, like was making a ton of money making these commercials, but because her look is so distinct and because, oh, it's not Progressive, it's Allstate, right? No, doesn't see. The insurance company did not do what they thought they did to me in their marketing there. Um, so this actor making a living acting, but really, really pigeonholed by this character that she is portraying. Really hard for her to jump outside of the box of that character. And this expose in the New York Times is really it's really interesting about how she went back from television and film back into live theater because that was the place that sort of allowed her to break um, that pigeonhole and that specificity, that singular character that she was allowed to portray. So actors are human beings with normal lives. Uh, and those lives look very different depending on who the actor is. But then on stage or on screen or behind the camera, they play characters. And typically, those characters have been written by someone else. So there is a playwright who is writing a character, and then an actor who is portraying that character. So inside of that portrayal, actors are doing things like memorizing lines. They're learning choreography. That might be dance choreography, that might be fight choreography, that might be intimacy choreography. They're learning blocking. Blocking is a theater term. It will be on your final blocking. It means the consistent movement from one part of the stage to another done repeatedly by an actor. So at the opening of this play, this actor is going to enter from stage right and they're going to cross to center while they say this particular line. That's an example of blocking. Okay. Actors typically are not alone on stage or on screen. So they are going to be interacting with other characters and actors. And inside of rehearsal, they are going to be taking direction from a director. So we're going to talk more about directors on Thursday. But in rehearsal, actors are bringing their understanding of their character. They're bringing their understanding of their character's motivations, their character's feelings, their character's desires, and they're working with the director to develop that character in conjunction with the development of every other character inside of this play to create a cohesive narrative. Now, actors are in charge of their character, they're in charge of themselves. Um, and the director is in charge of the vision and the execution of the entire production. And so, as a result, sometimes directors are going to ask actors to um, make or change choices based on that bigger, grander vision. And that is a part of what it means to be an actor. Okay. I want to dig into one particular acting technique, and I'm going to ask you to use this in the assignment that you're going to do later on in class, okay? Um, but this is one of the ways that actors create and break down characters that they are portraying, that they're learning to play. And this comes from a famous textbook um, by Robert Cohen. It's from Acting One, and it's called the GOAT method. GOTE is the abbreviation for this sort of script analysis. It's a script analysis technique, but it's also an acting technique. And so the first thing that an actor does inside of any given scene, and you can sort of do this in a macro way for the whole entire play, but it's really most effective for like small chunks, right? So like a scene that's like 5 to 7 minutes. What is the goal of the actor? Sorry, not the actor. What's the goal of the character? What does the character want more than anything else in that moment? What is it that they're trying to achieve? What is it that they're trying to get? What is it that they need? What's their goal? Obstacle. GO, right? Goal, obstacle. What or who is keeping the character from getting what they want, right? So let's do this with an example. That's what you're going to do also. But let's take that scene that we watched from Fences, right? That the scene in Fences where Troy has just revealed to Rose that he has been sleeping with another woman and that she is pregnant with his child. And Rose is Rose's major goal inside of that scene, and y'all, she has so many feelings, right? And those feelings are important, but her goal inside of that scene, I think, when I analyze that text, is to get Troy to stop sleeping with this other woman. I think that's her goal. Her obstacle, what or who is keeping the character from getting what they want, is Troy. He is in her way. He is the one not giving her what she wants or needs. So then we get to the T of GOAT, and T stands for tactic. And tactic means, what does the character do to try to get what they want, right? So the character in that scene in Fences, Rose, utilizes a number of different techniques, right? Or different tactics. So one tactic that she uses is by telling Troy what he should have done. One tactic she uses is by reminding him of all that she's invested in him, right? One tactic that she uses is reminding him of her family and what she values inside of a family. And all of those, that entire monologue, right? She's changing from tactic to tactic because he is still unrelentingly not giving her what she wants. I don't, this is a hard one, and I think different actors play this differently. I think in this scene in Fences, when Viola Davis is portraying this character of Rose, I think her expectation is that he will not give her what she needs and wants. I think she knows going into that conversation that it's a lost cause. But I think she needs and wants it so badly that she's going to try anyway. But I think that's part of why she holds her dignity so well, is because she's not begging him. She's not pleading. She's not, she's so strong, even though, even through this thing um, that she's going through. So, goal, obstacle, tactic, expectation. These are the building blocks that an actor uses to create and portray a character. You have to understand what the character wants. You have to understand what's in the way. You have to reasonably break down the tactics. You're going to use something different. And then the expectation. What does the character want? There's a lot of different ways to think about acting. One of the other ways that I wanted to talk to you about in terms of ways we can think about acting is an outside in acting technique versus an inside out acting technique. And this is a way to sort of break down a lot of different acting styles and a lot of different acting teachers. And they're both going to be rooted in the text. Because that's where character comes from, is from the playwright. But in an outside in acting style, it's going to really start with text analysis, an evaluation of who this person is based on their given circumstances. So the given circumstances, of course, are everything we know about them from the text. And then that actor is going to research. And so that research might look like watching other people in similar circumstances of the character, noting their mannerisms and their speech patterns. Um, it also might look like an actor, because maybe they're playing a very fictional character. They can't go watch someone pretend to be, or they can't go watch someone be, I don't know, maybe it's, I can't think of a good example right now. But But maybe it's that they can't realistically go watch someone be in the 1800s. So they would do a lot of research about it, right? They would look at all of the primary sources that they could to understand how people in the 1800s might have moved and how they might have spoken. And then they might begin to try on some of those mannerisms and some of those ways of speaking. And then they're going to note the kinds of feelings that those motions and speech patterns elicit, right? And so they're going to say, they might notice when I move my body in this way, I associate that with this feeling. And so I'm going to, inside of the portrayal of this character, utilize that sort of outside in knowledge, right? In an inside out methodology, an actor is going to work from their own personal experiences into the creation of this character. So as they're reading the text, they're going to be thinking about a time when they felt similarly, when they were in a similar circumstance, when they had a similar kind of conversation or a similar kind of feeling. And then they're gonna try to remember and think back to how they moved and spoke and felt inside of those uh, memories that connect to the character. And so they're going to utilize that sort of internal lens to create this character that becomes very different um, from them, but is utilizing their own personal experience. Here's what I know. Most actors that I work with use a combination of these two methods. They do a lot of research. If they're doing a dialect, they listen to native speakers from the place that they are trying to emulate the dialect of. They learn the dialect in a very outside in, research based way. They might do the same thing with a character if they're playing a character that is a real person, right? And they're constantly noticing themselves and other people and the ways their bodies and their voices, the major tools of an actor, their bodies and their voices, are utilized to create and elicit these kinds of feelings and emotions and connection with an audience. So outside in versus inside out is maybe it's an old school way of delineating actors. Um, and now I think in a contemporary model, actors are really using both of these things often. But I think it's still really useful for us to like understand the different ways you can go about getting into a character. Okay. I really wanted to talk with you about an example of a show process for an actor, the different things that an actor does inside of a show. So, before actors are even in a play, there's so many things that they have to do. And the first one of those things in a sort of show specific way is they have to audition. Auditions are typically involve some kind of memorized solo acting piece. So that might be a monologue, and it might also be a side from the show that you're auditioning for. But often it's a piece that you have chosen as the actor that you think showcases you and also connects to the material that you're auditioning for. Um, and you work and work and work on that, typically in a really solo kind of way. And then you take it to an audition or you record it and submit it. Um, and and that is your audition. So after an audition, then the director or the casting director or a team of people are going to get together and they're going to say, okay, we have these possibilities. And then they're going to get people together for what are called callbacks. And callbacks are usually about um, trying to get an understanding or a feel for chemistry between different actors and how different people sort of look and work together. It's also a way for directors and casting directors to see how well an actor works with other actors or with their own personal acting directing style. So callbacks are usually scene work. So you will get a script sometimes ahead of time, sometimes when you walk into a callback room, and you'll get a scene partner, and sometimes you'll have a little bit of time to prepare that scene, and sometimes the director will want to work with you on the preparation of that scene. Sometimes there are multiple callbacks for a show. When you get into television and film, this gets even more complicated, right? People are submitting for things. They're being asked then to send specific recordings back. Then they're being called in for screen tests. There's a whole bunch of different things that might be in this audition and callback process. There's also the process of agents and casting agencies and a whole bunch of other things. That's what acting classes are for. Okay. So inside of a typical theatrical rehearsal process, after auditions and callbacks, you're going to have a first rehearsal. And at that first rehearsal, you're going to read the play. And typically, you're going to read the play sitting around a table. But usually, you're going to just read through it so that everyone sort of has a beginning baseline of hearing this story in the voices of the actors who are going to be portraying it in this show. Sometimes designers present their work at that first rehearsal. Um, yeah. And then the rehearsals after the first read are often what we call table work. And table work is where actors continue to sit around a table and they will analyze the text together. So they'll ask questions, they'll work through their goat analyses, they'll read aloud the piece that they're doing over and over again, to really hammer out the what's happening, what are the goals, where are the tactic breakdowns. Some directors love table work and do a ton of it. Some directors, the only table work they do is that first read through on the first night. Some directors don't even do that. They want to get into blocking rehearsals. Blocking rehearsals are where typically actors have scripts in their hands and we've taped out the floor. So they're not on the actual set, they're not in the actual theater, but they sort of know where things are. There's stand-ins for things like tables and chairs and stairs. And directors are working with actors to figure out where actors go inside of each scene and how this story gets told and what are the goals and how are they playing the tactics. Um, how do the expectations come to life? And that's a blocking rehearsal. And typically, the thing that delineates blocking rehearsals from run-throughs and work-throughs is an off-book deadline. So most typically in a rehearsal process, at least what I see, is that when the whole show has been blocked, the expectation is that actors have memorized all of their lines. So you're blocking and you're writing down as an actor, you're writing down all the places that you go. And then after rehearsal or during the day, the next day, or whenever you have a couple of spare minutes, you are continuing to work to memorize your lines. You've probably done some of that work before rehearsals even started, but you're certainly going to continue that work um, inside of rehearsal. So once actors are memorized, they start working the show in usually bigger and bigger chunks. So they might run scenes, they might run acts, then they might run the whole play. And then we get to what are called technical rehearsals. And inside of a technical rehearsal, we stop and start a lot because we're adding lighting and sound and scenery into what the actors and director have been doing inside of a rehearsal room without any of those elements. When we switch to dress rehearsal, Sometimes we add costumes at tech and sometimes we don't. It depends on the company and the process. But dress rehearsals are typically working through the play without stopping. And that's really the biggest difference between a technical rehearsal and a dress rehearsal. At least that's the ideal difference, is that in a dress rehearsal, we're running under show conditions, so that everybody gets the feel of how the show runs and works. Now, there's always changes happening. So after a dress rehearsal, the cast is going to sit down with the director and they're going to have what are called notes. And the director is going to say, this scene really felt like this tonight. I think it really needs to feel like this. Let's make this, and this changes for tomorrow. Or I need you to do this differently in this scene, or this isn't landing the way that it did in rehearsal. What can we do about that? And so they're going to work with actors continually throughout this tech and dress process. And then we bring an audience in. So a preview is typically the first time an audience is going to see the show. And sometimes we call that an invited dress. Um, and in a lot of places we have a preview. So an invited dress, you're typically giving tickets away. At a preview, you're selling tickets, typically for a reduced price. And in a preview, the tradition has been, and this only gets broken very rarely, but is that press doesn't review previews. So when a show is in a preview, a critic might go see it, but they're not going to write their review about it until the show has officially opened. And so previews are this great way for actors and directors and designers to see how an audience responds. And then they have rehearsal time to make changes and to make adjustments based on how the audience is responding or not responding to the choices that they've already made. So particularly in with new work, or the development of something, a preview is really important. And then we open a show. Inside of previews, things are changing, right? Once you hit opening night, the expectation is that the show is basically set. The movement of the actors, the intention with which they're saying their lines, the pacing of the piece, that's all set. They're done. They've created the thing, and now an actor's job and the crew that's maintaining that show, it's their job to maintain it. To try to give, and we talked about this when we talked about ephemeral experiences. No two nights in the theater are exactly alike. Everyone knows and understands that. And that is what we're trying to do, is to give audience after audience the same experience or a similar experience based on the work that we did together inside of rehearsal. And so that's what actors and stage managers and crew are doing through the run of the show. And the run of the show might be one night, might be one weekend of 5 or 6 shows, might be 2 weeks, so a total of like 10 performances. And it might run for 8 years or 10 years, or right? The run of the show can be a really, really long time or a really short time. Um, in regional theater, so Broadway, Broadway's not going to set a closing date typically for the run of a production. They're going to say when it's going to open, and then they're going to run it as long as it's making money. And when it stops making money, they're going to announce its closing. A regional theater model is less about making money, but they might do what's called an extension. So if they have a piece that is selling particularly well or is just meeting their mission in a really particular way, they might extend it. And those extensions are pre-written into people's contracts, so they know that there's a possibility that they might have to work on the show for an additional week or an additional 2 weeks, of course, for extra pay. Um, but that, right, a closing date is not always necessarily a closing date. And then the show closes. And sometimes the show comes back in what's called a remount. And remounts typically have much shorter rehearsal processes. One of the most typical shows that gets remounted year after year is A Christmas Carol. So if you have a tradition of seeing A Christmas Carol at Cincinnati Playhouse in the Park or Cleveland Playhouse, or really any of the places that do it around the country, and there are a lot of them, um, they typically are remounting their Christmas Carol every year. And so they might be changing a few things about it from year to year, but it is typically not going to have a full production and rehearsal process. And that's one of the things that makes it such an incredible moneymaker for a company annually, is that they have fewer costs in producing it, and they have greater ticket revenue because people see it over and over and over again. So remounts are a great way for theater companies to recoup the cost of creating new work often. At least that's sort of their typical process. Okay. So now I want to talk to you about the assignment that you're going to go do. Okay. So there's two things. There's a quiz that is about this video. So you have to have listened to me or read the captioning, and and answer the questions. You can retake it. You can listen to this while you take it. The point is that I want you to hear the important things. Um, so that's what the quiz questions are about. And then the second piece is really asking you to do some applying of this, particularly the goat acting technique, to your observation of some acting. So I want you to choose a scene from TV or film that of acting that you really like. Like maybe it's a character that you really like, maybe it's an actor that you really like. And I want you to choose a scene that's like 3 to 5 minutes long, right? So you can watch it at least a couple of times in sort of quick succession, but it's not so short that it's unclear. Um, and then I want you to analyze that the choices the actor's making and how they illuminate the goal, obstacle, tactics, and expectation for you. So the goal and obstacle should be, I think, pretty clear and pretty straightforward. What's the character trying to do? What's in their way, right? The tactics are where you're really going to dig into the acting, the choices that the actor is making with their body and with their voice. So, how are they changing the way they're going about trying to get what they're trying to get? Those are tactics. And then, what is their expectation? How do you know that from their acting, right? Or where, and maybe we don't know. We don't know. Forget that I said the word no. What indicated it to you? What made you think that? Even if you don't know, you have this inkling. Can you figure out why you have that inkling? So you get to choose the piece. If you don't want to choose, use the one that I chose, which is the Viola Davis Rose monologue from Fences by August Wilson. It's a beautifully acted piece, and it happens to be all over YouTube, which is great. Um, so that's what you're gonna do. And that is our Tuesday lesson on acting. Um, I will be coming to you the same way on Thursday. And we will be back together in person um, next week. So thanks for hanging in there through this long video. I appreciate you all, and I will see you soon.